We couldn't have done phase 1 or phase 2 without you guys. We had 56 partners from across the state, chambers, regional economic development, corporations, SBA, CWE, SCORE, and so many other great people helping to distribute the survey. And because of that, we were able to get 1,611 businesses representing 174 towns and cities to respond to this, and a number of different industries and business sizes. So again, a really solid sampling of our businesses. You know, a lot of people are talking about survey fatigue, but we actually got more in phase 2, which we were kind of shocked by. We got around 1,500 last time, and now we've gotten over 1,600, more communities represented and different areas of the state too. So again, we couldn't have done it without you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, the meat of what we're here to hear about and learn about is going to be presented by Sean McKinley from the UNH Survey Center. But before Sean starts his presentation, I did want to turn it over to Andy Smith. Andy has also been on our advisory board for a number of years, and it was a really great partnership for us to start working with the Survey Center to be able to develop the phase 1 and phase 2 of the survey. And we're looking forward to doing phase 3 in July. So in just a couple more months, so that we'll have a really nice data set starting in June of 2020, then the February mark, and then again in July. So we'll talk more about that later, but Andy, would love for you to say a couple quick words.
Well, thank you very much for having me here today, and I'm really proud to have been a advisory board member of the SBDC going back, I don't know how long. Fred could probably tell me, because I think Fred is the only other person on this call that's been there that long. I want to reiterate a couple things that Liz said about how the SBDC works and how that worked with this partnership here. You in the business world understand partnerships are critical. Critical for you to get your jobs done, critical for you to participate with other organizations, and it's also critical in the research world. In this, SBA, as you know, is a partnership between the federal government through the Small Business Administration, the state of New Hampshire through the BEA there, and through the University of New Hampshire. And as Liz highlighted, this particular research project is also even a bigger partnership. We could not have done this research without the help and the assistance of the 56 different business organizations in the state that participated in this. That was hugely important. We simply couldn't do it. It's really difficult to conduct business research, especially with the heads of businesses and small businesses. People are very busy. They don't have time to talk about these things. They don't understand the importance of this kind of research. And I think that your assistance really made those doors open up so we could do this work with us. The things that I think are really important about this, and Sean's going to go into a lot of the more fundamental things that came up with this particular survey, but this project I think is very critical, because this is obviously an intervention in our lives that is much bigger than we have seen before. And these surveys are allowing us to not only understand the impact that COVID and the policies that followed COVID have had on the business world, but it also is going to provide policymakers, or it has been providing policymakers, with guidance as to what they need to do into the future. And all 3 of these surveys will provide a record for future policymakers to go back and understand the impacts of policies on the business world should something like this happen again. And then finally, this research I think is very important to businesses themselves, because the work that we're getting from this is going into the planning and development of a series of seminars on building resiliency in businesses. This COVID obviously is a major crisis, public health crisis, economic crisis, but it won't be the last one that we see. And hopefully this research will help policymakers understand what to do into the future. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Sean McKinley, who's a research associate at the UNH Survey Center. He's been with us for about 5 years, 6 years, and he's really been the critical person in leading the research that we're doing here with the SBDC, and has been central to getting this project done. It was quite an undertaking, and I really want to thank Sean for being able to do that. And I'm going to turn this over to him to have him walk through some of the highlights of the findings. And also, I would like to have you all think about any questions that you would have that Sean could address when this is over, or Liz or I might be able to address. So we'll try to keep it short and try to leave more time for your questions. I think that's going to be probably more helpful for everybody. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andy, for that introduction, and thanks, Liz, for setting all this up, and thank you to all of you for showing up, of course. So I'm going to walk you through the report, as Andy mentioned. I'm going to share my screen now and make sure everybody can see that we're all looking at the same thing. Is that looking good for everybody? Hope so. All right, so the report has an executive summary, as their last one did. If you saw the presentation that we gave back last summer when we were talking about this, or it might have been late fall or early fall, we have the executive summary breaking down the results in a shorter form, so you can quickly at a glance go through and see what findings that we had. The report, if you saw the last one, is broadly similar, as you'll see in a moment. It's largely similar types of charts and other things like that. So if you saw that before, you'll probably be familiar with it. If you didn't, I'll walk you through briefly how to read some of the different charts and how this works. One of the key things that is really great about doing a second iteration like this is that we can have some new charts. One of the new ones that you'll find that I'll point out in a moment are what we call arrow charts. And those allow us just to see the changes from last iteration to this one in the same questions. And that adds really a whole new dimension to the findings that we didn't have previously, because obviously we hadn't asked the questions before. So that really allows us to kind of enrich the data a bit and tell us relatively how things have changed over time. Demographic section, I'll just go quickly through. As you can see, a lot of our responses are in the Seacoast area. We did get a good amount in the North Country towards the end of the field period, which was good as well. And we still do have a good amount in the rest of Southern New Hampshire as well, but a lot of turnout from the Seacoast. The types of industries, this is largely the same as what we were seeing before: arts, entertainment, recreation, accommodation, food services, retail, trade. Those are the biggest industries, but it's pretty well spread out, as you can see. The survey partners, we asked about this as well, just so you can see the various people that, various entities that all the respondents are affiliated with, but we can move through that relatively quickly. So one of the things that we asked, and this slightly changed from last time, is about people's status during the pandemic and how their hours were affected by the pandemic. And as you can see, about half of the responding businesses said they had to reduce their hours of operation, and about a third said they had to close temporarily, and about 1% of people who responded said that they had to close permanently, but about 1/3 said they didn't have any change whatsoever. Again, if you saw the last report, you'll be familiar. I mentioned these are these charts that say by select demographics. We're going to pretty much skip through that here with this presentation. It's probably getting a little too much into the weeds, but if you're interested, you can find the full report from the SBDC and really look into digging into showing differences between demographic groups in how they respond to this question, to each question. So for this one, for instance, people in the retail trade industry, they're more likely than everyone put together to say that they had to reduce their hours of information. And these charts display that sort of information throughout the report. So then we also asked people about when they were operating under reduced hours, how much did they have to usually reduce them? And you can see here about a third didn't reduce them too much, less than 25% of their hours they typically reduced, but about 3 in 10 reduced their hours by 50% or more. So that's a pretty significant group of people, of businesses that had to reduce their hours quite a bit. And then we asked, among those who temporarily closed, how long they had to do so. And here again, you can see about half had to close for 1 to 3 months, which is a fair amount of time. And more than a third had to close for even longer than that, more than 3 months. So other interesting findings, things that we didn't mention or didn't ask about last time. So we don't have a direct comparison, but still very interesting findings. We also were asking people about why they closed or reduced their hours of operation. Health and safety concerns and being required to do so, and a loss of revenue are clearly the 3 most important reasons. But there are other reasons here, and some of these that we included were illustrative of of some other things that people might be experiencing. And bear in mind, please, that this is all select all that apply, this question. So of course, multiple of these reasons could be applicable to any business. Some of these things are like, such as employees being unwilling to work or unable to do so, unable to get a sufficient workforce. Those are about 1 in 6 businesses had one of those. Exposure to COVID, suspected or confirmed, having to homeschool children, caring for family members, or closing for the season. Not too many people, but these are also factors that we're seeing in people's reasons for having to close or reduce their hours of operation. And when we ask the very few amount of people who say, why did your business permanently close? Among that small group, there's about 21 people. Most of them are saying that it's, or a majority say that it's entirely or mostly due to COVID, and a small number say it's mostly due to other reasons. But of that small group, a fair amount are saying that it's due to COVID. We also asked, as we did last time, about the size of employees, or the number of employees, the size of the businesses that we were talking about. The group that we got to respond this time, as opposed to last time, is a little bit smaller. You can see that we average about 12 employees. I believe it was slightly higher in the teens in June. But this group of people, we also asked about the number of employees they had back in June and in February 2020. And you can see here that their number of employees is down since February 2020 by about 3 people. But it's up by about half of a person since June. So relatively unchanged since June and slightly lower than in February. And here's another demographic chart. Like I said, skip through those for now. And we also just asking about the change in employees derived from that previous question. You can see that 14% of people have more employees, about half of the same number, but more than a third of businesses say they have fewer employees than they did in February 2020. So that is a significant impact, as we're seeing that's more than a third of people. Finances is obviously an important part of this. And this, again, we asked the same question as we did in June. And here you can see that the impact of COVID is still quite acute for people. 7 in 10 businesses say that their monthly revenue has decreased due to COVID-19, understandably so, but that's still a pretty striking number. However, that is actually better than in June, when 83% of people said that was the case, and almost half of them said that their revenue had decreased by 50% or more. Here we're seeing that's quite a bit lower. We're seeing a lot more people saying that the revenues decreased by 20 to 49%, still quite problematic, but that's definitely an improvement over what we were seeing in June. Here's one of those arrow charts I was discussing. Again, we're going to skip through these because we're delving into the specifics of the demographics, but just to reiterate, this is how you'd read this chart. Is you can see that the arrow is pointing in the direction we've gone since our last iteration. You can see that overall, the amount of people who have seen the revenue increase or stay the same, labeled here, has gone from 17 to 30%. And then you can see the differences, how that varies among different demographic groups, including industry, for instance, is a good example, where you can see that accommodation and food services and arts, entertainment, and recreation, those sorts of businesses haven't really seen much of an increase in the percentage you say their revenue has stayed the same or gone up. That hasn't changed much since June, but some of these other businesses like educational services, healthcare, social assistance, manufacturing, those have actually seen a pretty sizable jump in the percentage you say that their revenue has stayed the same or increased. That's gotten better since June. We also asked about accounts receivable, whether those have been slower. Again, improvement since June, down to 38% from 47%, saying any of them, 24 to 34. So now we are saying none whatsoever. So this is also showing some improvement, but still a plurality of people saying that at least some of their accounts receivable have been slower due to COVID-19. We asked people about which of these periods, the more earlier period or the later period in which, since COVID has started, which has been worse in terms of their accounts receivable being slower. Didn't see too much clear results here. It's about 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 of people saying that earlier period, this later period since September, or the two periods are about the same in terms of whether their accounts receivable were slower in which of them. Deferring or modifying payments, similarly, better news than we had in June. 7 in 10 people say that they haven't had to do that at all, whereas in June, 58% said that they did. So again, we're seeing improvement here. Same deal here, where we're asking about which of these periods was worse. And here it's a little more clear that among the people who did have to delay or modify or defer or modify their payments, about half of them say that it was worse in that early period of the pandemic rather than in the later time, and about 3 in 10 say that they're about the same. when people are asked what caused them to experience these financial losses, still, as in June, a decline in sales is clearly the largest reason for this. But we also see reduced hours of operation remains right up there, being required to close, supply chain interruptions. Some of these, the results are broadly similar to what we saw in June for really this whole question. We're not seeing a lot for being closed about the season, which we didn't ask in June. And choosing the temporary close, unable to work remotely. Again, these in the 15, 16 range. It's still about 1 in 6 businesses, but for the large part, decline in sales is 6 in 10 people are referencing that as one of the reasons that they've lost money. And which of these has the greatest impact? Again, this further buttresses the idea that decline in sales is far and away the most important factor here. We asked people the most, second most, and third most important reasons that they lost money. As you can see, in June, it was 92%. In February, it's 89%. So not a huge change there. Where we did see some changes through reduced hours of operation, went from 47% of people said that was in their top 3 most important reasons in June, to now in February, that's 59%. So we did see a fair increase there. And then we saw a bit of a decline in the percentage who cited the employees being unable to work remotely as one of the reasons that they have lost money. That was 30% in June, and now it's down to 19%. So there might be some element of less of a need for working remotely, and there might be some element of increased ability of employees to work remotely. When asked about relief programs, we find that 3/4 of respondents applied for relief in 2020. And about half plan to apply for relief in 2021. And overall, grouping these two questions together, you can see that 62% of people applied in 2020 and plan to do so in 2021. 14% applied in 2020 but don't plan to do so in 2021. 5% didn't apply in 2020 but do plan to this year, and 19% didn't apply in 2020 and they don't plan to in 2021 either. So it's kind of a good breakdown of how these two questions interact, these two ones here, as you can see. We asked people about the federal relief programs that they might have applied for. And you can see payroll protection program far and away is the most common one. We have 91% of our respondents actually received that, and a small number applied for it but didn't receive it as well. Nearly everyone's aware of this program. It's clearly the most common one that people utilized. We're also seeing, though, more than half of people used an EIDL advance or loan. And again, most people seem to know about those. A small number chose to apply or decide to apply but didn't receive those. And others say they chose not to apply. But these are also very common programs, as well as the SBA loan deferment program. 3 in 8 people received that. And as you can see down here with the arrow chart, you can see that the payroll protection program went way up, as well as these other 3. The percentage of businesses that applied for or received these, when we asked it in June, it was still relatively low, as you can see, 61%, 28, 28, 10, but they've all shot up in that time since June, understandably so, as more of these programs come online and perhaps people's needs grow. We've seen huge growth in these top 4 federal programs and the businesses that are utilizing them. We also asked about state, municipal, and private relief programs. And here you can see that unemployment, Main Street Relief Fund, unemployment for your employees or yourself, and the Main Street Relief Fund and the same 2.0 program. These are, again, there's a clear sign that these are the top 4, outstripping by far all these other options that we have, including private grants, childcare fund, work share, and some of these more niche programs that large amounts of people, about 2/3 or more here, as you can see, aren't even aware of. And a fair amount of these people chose not to apply, but for the most part, people aren't even aware of a lot of these different programs. Clearly, the most important ones were unemployment and the Main Street Relief Fund and the Relief Fund 2.0. And as we saw with the federal programs, huge growth here in the percentage of businesses that utilize these from June until February. Only 26% of people had utilized unemployment for their employees in February, and now we're up to 78%. So you can just see enormous change in these top 3 that we're seeing since last summer. In terms of resiliency, we asked this time in June, we just asked if you had one or if you didn't. This time we also asked if you've developed a plan since COVID-19 has happened. And you can see that 15% of people had a plan before COVID, 19% had developed one since, and about half still don't have a plan. And 18% don't know or say that it's not applicable. So this is an interesting finding and interesting in the change that we saw since June. And here you can see that a fair amount of businesses have taken action since the pandemic started. And here again, you can see this demographics chart. You can see that companies that are larger, those with more than 25 employees, perhaps understandably, are more likely to have had a plan before COVID. And yeah, different types of businesses are also more likely to develop a plan, notably healthcare and social assistance and the arts, entertainment, and recreation types of businesses are more likely to be in this group here. We also asked about the components that are part of this plan. And as you can see, while an increasing amount of businesses have these resiliency plans, a lot of them have pretty incomplete plans. Only about half have a list of potential threats, and slightly fewer have communications developed with important stakeholders, and even less than that say that employees being trained and a list of alternative suppliers and logistics are part of their plan. So there's still a fair amount of these components of a plan that a lot of people are lacking, and these results are largely similar to what we were seeing in June. So it doesn't appear that many of the new people who have started to, who have developed a plan since June have included, they haven't really changed, or they're not really all that different from those who had ones in the first place in what's in their plan. In their overall management of business, here we asked about a lot of various things that people could have done while trying to get through the pandemic with their business. About half of our respondents say that they purchased PPE for their employees. 40% brought people back under the PPP. 35% changed the layout of their business to protect their employees. We're also saying, as you can see, reducing employee hours, health and safety training, working without a salary. Those are the things that just under a third of people have done. So that's pretty common findings, or pretty large scale things that people are doing here. Down here, you can see again the changes since June in these different activities. Not a ton of changes towards the bottom, but you can see that more people say they've purchased PPE. It's gone from 44 to 51%. And more people have changed the layout of their business. So it's gone from 28 to 35% since June. And slightly fewer people say they laid off or furloughed employees. So that's probably a result of the slightly different group of people we got to answer the survey. But more people doing some of these things to protect their employees, as you can see. And we also asked about working remotely. Here are the results pretty similar to what we had in June. 79% unchanged say that they don't have anyone working from home. 5% say everyone is working from home at the moment. You can see the small differences in here of the differences between them, but really not all that different from June and what we saw. And again, understandably, larger businesses are more likely to have at least someone working remotely. And people with more businesses, or people with more employees than they had. And then by contrast, retail trade and accommodation and food services industries are very unlikely to have anyone working remotely. Again, perhaps not surprisingly. We also asked about the innovations and modifications that people have implemented at their business. Things like requiring employees and customers to wear masks. More than 6 in 10 businesses are doing that. The physical changes to the location, again, offering new products and services, working from home. You can see that there's a large group of these things that people are doing in response to the pandemic, including e-commerce, curbside delivery, home delivery, takeout. Some of these are not applicable, obviously, to some businesses. So you can see that even given that these numbers are pretty strong for the amount of different things that businesses have done in order to adapt to the COVID pandemic. And again, you can see down here the arrow charts that change since June, the physical changes of location and offering new products and services. Those have gone up pretty significantly since then, and really none of them have actually gone down, the ones we asked this time and in June. So you can see that people are doing an increasing amount of things as the pandemic continues. And go through those demo charts. So we also asked people about one thing in an open-ended way that they've done in response to the pandemic that's been successful. So trying to glean some positive impacts out of all of this. And we can see here that a large amount of people say that they were talking about how they change their how they deliver or how they produce their products or services. It's a little more than a quarter of people mentioned that. And others, about 1 in 5, talked about how they protected the health of their employees or customers. Those have both increased since June, and other people talked about implementing remote or virtual work, better communication or advertising. Some people just said that they kept working or they reopened or they stayed in business. Just enduring was what they were proud of, adding new products and services. There's a lot of different things, as you can see here, that people have done and that they were proud of and that they say have been successful that they wanted to convey. So there is some element of positivity that arose out of all this, excuse me. Talking about recovery, we are only about 1 in 5 businesses say that they are better off financially than they were in June 2020. So even in the midst of the pandemic, we're still talking about 42% of people say that they're actually worse than they were in June when the pandemic had already started. About 35% are feeling the same. So while some of our other questions indicate that things aren't quite as bad as they might have been in June, this question actually tells us or hints at that things are worse for a plurality of businesses in the state than they were even in the summer. And again, you can see the demo charts showing the differences and types of businesses about how they've been affected here. When we're asking people about how their concerns, they most frequently mention maintaining sales or revenue and maintaining customers. Again, understandably, that's pretty consistent with what we were seeing about a decline in sales being the biggest problem they were finding. Those are clearly the 2 most important factors people are concerned about. But we also find that public acceptance of the vaccine, of the COVID-19 vaccine, is quite high. It's the 3rd highest concern for people. And it's something that more than 6 in 10 people are actually worried about. So this is an interesting finding. And in the same vein, the availability of the vaccine for employees is also something that's a large concern for people. So these are 2 things that are kind of outside that traditional concern about getting customers and selling products and things like that. There are direct concerns about COVID that are high in the list of concerns for people. We also have supply chain disruptions, access to capital, cybersecurity, long list here of various things that people might be concerned about. But those are the most salient things in people's minds that they're concerned about. Here's another arrow chart showing how these things have changed since June. And you can see that concerns about timely payment of bills, cleaning the work environment, access to PPE, those have all declined since June. So those are all good signs. Even things like bringing back employees and being forced to lay people off. So this is another sign that some things are better. On the other hand, we do see a rise in the people who are concerned about cybersecurity. That's gone all the way up from 40 to 52%. So a rise there in concern, and also in energy costs. We did do this in February as opposed to June, so that might have something to do with it. But we also have access to COVID-19 testing. Even now, as the testing seems to have ramped up quite a bit, and there are a lot more tests going on than there used to be, than there were in June, and certainly before then. Access to testing is still a pretty high concern for people. Almost half of people say that it's concerning for them. So these are some interesting findings about how these concerns have changed since the summer. And going forward, similarly, we're talking about the most important things people think are renewed access to customers. Most people say that that's very or somewhat important. Health and safety guidance, financial assistance as well, continues to be something that most people think is very or somewhat important. It's 7 in 10 people. And as we saw in the last chart, access to the COVID-19 vaccine for employees also preoccupies a fair amount of people, and especially when you see that a lot of these people say that this is not really applicable to them if they don't have any employees or if people have already been vaccinated. Most people are concerned about this as well. And resiliency planning as well, based on what we saw earlier, most people still do not have a resiliency plan, and those that do have many components that aren't included. You can see that still a majority of people, almost 2/3, think that resiliency planning is going to be very or somewhat important as well. And cybersecurity, as we saw in the previous chart as well, high on the list of people's concerns here. Again, demo chart showing the differences. Resiliency planning is slightly less important, but that might also reflect some people having now their own resiliency plans and didn't before. Cybersecurity, as we mentioned, has become more important, and training on recovery and reopening of best practices has become less concerning to people, or less of something that they think is going to be important in the future. Let's do those. We asked people about these modifications that they've made, if you recall, things like e-commerce, collaborating with other businesses, takeout, and things like that. And we asked people if they are going to continue doing them or whether they plan to do so after the pandemic's over. And here, as we saw in June, this was a quite robust response and quite interesting that huge amounts of people who have started to engage in all of these different things plan to keep doing so. So these innovations are likely to not go away, some almost not at all, e-commerce in particular. You can see almost everyone who's doing e-commerce now plan to keep doing so, and collaborating with other businesses as well. 90% of people, and as you can see here, this isn't a small group of people who are now collaborating with other businesses. 90% of them plan to keep doing so. Even things like delivery of products, how you do so, takeout, home delivery, curbside delivery, you're seeing about 2/3 or more of people say that they're started offering it as a result of the pandemic, and they're going to keep doing so. So this is actually a quite interesting finding, and you can see again with the arrow chart that nearly all of these went up. You can see takeout in particular, employees working from home, curbside delivery. These people are more likely than they were in June to say they're going to keep doing this. Manufacturing and PPE actually went down a little bit, so there might be some reflection that might reflect that some people consider that won't be as important once the pandemic's over, but still very high results here that these changes and these innovations people have made aren't likely to immediately revert back to normal later. We asked people about how confident their business will be, how confident they are their business will be operating in these various time periods, as you can see here. And people are more confident than they were in June. As you can see in June, still high confidence, relatively speaking. Most people think that they're going to be open and they're very confident in the short term, and a large amount are very or somewhat confident even in the long term. But you can see that all of these have improved since June, which is another good sign that with increasing confidence, whoops, sorry, hit my mouse there. You can see that there's increasing confidence in people's businesses and that in their continued survival. And you can see down here in the arrow chart, the different types of businesses and how they've increased. Each one of these that you can see below, they are all more confident that they'll be operating 12 months from now than they were in June. Which is a very good sign since the pandemic is still going on and we're not out of it yet, but confidence is already increasing. And you can see in particular in the arts and entertainment and recreation industry, it's gone up quite a bit, as well as businesses that are in northern New Hampshire. And then we asked people more generally about how confident they are that the economy will have recovered as a whole. And here too, you're seeing increased confidence. Not as much in the short term, that's relatively the same as it was in June. But as you can see, over 12 months, there's increasing confidence that the economy will have recovered to the pre-COVID levels within 12 months from now. And just as a note, we completed these obviously in February, but just to be clear, this was before Congress approved the relief package, which I believe they did earlier today. So just bearing that in mind that people might be actually even more confident given that, but we don't know because this was asked before that it happened. And again, you can see the arrow chart here showing differences in people's confidence. Again, northern New Hampshire, huge growth since June in confidence in the state economy. So that takes us to the appendix. This is just showing all of the results by every different demographics. Won't belabor the presentation with any of that. If you're really interested and want to scour through there, again, you can get in touch with the SBDC. But that's the main body of the report. And so I'm going to stop now and be happy to answer any of your questions. And I hope this has been illuminating for you in the current state of things.
Sheldon, this was fantastic. You did a phenomenal job again putting together this report. I particularly love the additions of the arrows to show the comparison of June 2020 to where we are now. I think that just makes it much easier for us to be able to read. And some of the stuff that kind of jumped out to me, thinking through the relief programs and the fact that 75% applied in 2020, but 53% still plan on applying this year. Like all of those businesses, we're hoping to, we will continue to run our webinars, keep our COVID assistance page updated, and making sure that our newsletter send out the most up-to-date information on new programs as they're rolling out so that we are able to continue to support businesses there. But I have a couple of thoughts too, but I almost feel like I should let the audience respond to what you're seeing. And that we've got questions in the chat too that we can address too, but does anybody have any initial thoughts?
Yeah, this is Fred Coker. I was interested in the increase in cybersecurity. Did you get a sense in doing your survey that some of them have been hit already, have been affected by a cyber attack?
I haven't gone through the final pages of the survey where there are some more comments coming in from the businesses. So there may be some in there, so I'll dig into that a little bit more. But it was really interesting though that like last June, we were surprised at how few people were concerned about cybersecurity, but now seeing the jump from, was it 40 to 52% are concerned?
And the reason I asked that is because the segment I did last Sunday with the banking commissioner, the number one priority for banks in this year is cybersecurity. So there's a relationship there.
There definitely is. And I think, Will Arvello, to your point, more people are doing things online and they are more aware and I think concerned. So yes, that coming out in the survey, I'm not too surprised about, but then also, Andrew, what you're saying too, some of the bigger stories that we're also hearing about what's happening nationally. So it is on the rise, but I'm also happy to say that in about 2 weeks, we're going to be launching a cybersecurity initiative with the New Hampshire Tech Alliance. So stay tuned for more information on that, where we'll be helping to support businesses through trainings and advising around cyber issues. So more to come.
And Liz, one thing I'll point out is that we actually got more small businesses this time than we did in June. So the increase in the concern about cybersecurity isn't just reflective of larger businesses who are really worried about that. We actually, since we got those more smaller businesses, it's actually indicative that even businesses with fewer than 10 employees have increasing concern about cybersecurity.
That's significant.
So Liz and Fred, this is Tim Dining. Just another perspective from a small business. We were actually encouraged to start working towards our CMMC Level 3 cybersecurity but before the pandemic, and we were led to do so by our defense customers. So it may be somewhat coincidental. There's an overall drive throughout military and defense customers, and now the industrial customer base is following suit to improve cybersecurity that I think preceded the pandemic.
Right, right.
So there are a number of different factors that are likely weighing in to that increase in concern. Other questions or comments?
Just, and probably you didn't pick up on this, but maybe you did. Once the federal money runs out, and it will, and customers have not picked up like they hoped, there's going to be a gap probably for some businesses, certain types of businesses. I'm just wondering where they turn in the state for help after that. Liz, maybe you have a better sense of that.
I don't know when the funding is going to run out and when those resources will lapse. We do have this new wave coming through, but you know what? I think I would always say that regardless of what the issue or the challenge is, I would encourage people to come to SBDC, check in with your advisor, because our advisors are not just talking about, what relief programs to apply for. They're looking at, 30 days out, 90 days out, 6 months out, and trying to help businesses prepare for what's next and making sure that they're thinking through their cash flow, they're thinking through market changes, and they are looking ahead and realizing when relief funding will, if and when it runs out, that they are prepared and that they've made their own business more resilient. So that kind of ties into the idea of the Resiliency Academy.
Exactly.
We're trying to prepare the business for whatever is next. Yes, we're facing a pandemic now, but 10 years ago, it was the Mother's Day floods and all of the unexpected challenges around the flooding out in the western part of the state, or what happens if there is a fire in your building and you have lost absolutely everything. Like, how are you going to be navigating some of those other challenges? And we don't know what's next. So to go back to your question, Will, about what's going to be included in the Resiliency Academy, we will be touching on a number of different issues in it, but it's, identifying risks, threats, putting together your emergency communications plan, making sure your team is prepared and knows exactly what to do in the event of an emergency, or if you're not able to access your building? How do you communicate with your customers, your suppliers, and working through all of that. We'll be doing on our Academy session days, it'll be a lot of learning. But then our advisors are going to be hosting regional cohorts with a number of the chambers of commerce around the state to dig in much more deeply into creating a resiliency plan, as well as updating an existing plan, which also kind of ties back into what we're hearing in the survey, which is exciting, that more businesses have created a plan. Since we heard from them back in June, but they're also saying that they're not, those plans are missing some components. So we will have a guidebook and a template to offer businesses to help walk them through in a very systematic way. You know, this is like, you know, chapter 1, chapter 2, or section 1, 2, 3, 4 of a resiliency plan. We're also going to be digging in deeper into cybersecurity issues, because that too is a really key component of how to make your business more resilient and protect yourself from a potential cyber attack. Or if you have been a victim of a cyber attack, how do you recover from that? What do you do? So hope that answered your question. It was a really long-winded one, long-winded answer.
No, I always, over the years, I've already seen these gaps show up where funding wasn't available, except through SBA. But not everybody knows how to access SBA or how to work the system. The federal money will run out. And so it's just, you're right. It does factor right into your resiliency workshop that you have coming up.
So Fred, this is Warren Daniel. PPP actually, what was passed by the House today, PPP runs out March 31st of this year. So we have another 3 weeks left to get out, to get the word out for second draw on PPP, and for those that haven't taken part in the first draw. And they loosened the program around sole proprietors as well. So those that are interested in second round or a first round needs to get it in within the next 3 weeks. Of course, for that you need some kind of banking relationship. What I was struck by is 42%. 42% think their business is worse off than it was in June of 2020. That goes to lack of confidence in the future. And again, that's pre the American Rescue Plan. But I think that's partially a seasonal effect. We're talking February versus June, optimism versus, you know, trying to get out of the winter. That might be partially a seasonal effect. I think if we did that survey in June and July, when people are out and about more, when more people have been vaccinated, I think we might see a different result. And the other thing I was struck by was that only 26% think that the economy will improve in 12 months, or strongly think the economy will improve in 12 months. I was disappointed in that. My personal opinion is that 2022 will be kind of the break-even year, and then after 2022, people will begin to get out of the cash flow problems, depending what kind of impact all the different rescue plans have had. So that's a little bit of my input, but I am really excited about the Resiliency Academy. I think that addresses a lot of the issues. Liz articulated that really well, and we're working very hard to get people signed up for that.
Warren, I can respond to that. And I was just trying to pull the numbers out here. You can find it on our website. But in our most recent consumer confidence survey of adults, New Hampshire adults, we found that it was a significant percentage that said it would be more than a year that before the New Hampshire economy recovered. Sean, you might know the exact percentage on that, but it was quite high. It was higher than I expected it to be. And I think to your point, I think it reflects some of the seasonal aspects of it, but we've just come out of a big spike here, and the vaccine hasn't hit yet. And I think some of the optimism that we even saw last fall has dissipated.
Andy, it's Will. I had a question the question about supply chain, I know it didn't rank high, but I think it was about 21% in terms of disruption. And you know, my conversations with businesses across the spectrum, whether you're a restaurant or a manufacturing plant, supply chain became such an issue in throughout this whole process. I'm wondering if there's anything there that would be beneficial in terms of doing some sort of a follow-up survey down the road to try to get a handle on supply chain, because again, we saw it throughout the whole economy, and I'd love to see more research on that. Maybe somebody's doing it, but a survey here in New Hampshire might be helpful to us understanding what those how people dealt with those, how they, how businesses tried to deal with the issues around lack of products or parts or et cetera, and how do we prepare for the future, really?
So we're going to be conducting another one of these surveys in June, and I think that's actually a really good thing that we could do to add a section specifically on supply chain. So Liz, you might, and Sean, you might want to just jot that down as a placeholder for our next survey to talk about that, because I think you're right. That's been a major factor. People have kind of adapted on the fly, but it's still going to be an issue, and it's going to be an issue now going forward that people are going to be thinking about, and hopefully they're building that into their resiliency plans about alternative suppliers for things, and thinking about those things in advance rather than having to panic and say, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now?
Yeah, that is a good point. We can definitely, the survey was a little bit lengthy, but we might want to add a couple extra questions on some of the issues that became more of a concern or were of more interest to respondents this time around versus last June, to try to get a better understanding or a deeper understanding of kind of where things were on, on cyber, on supply chain, or on some of those key issues. So we will definitely take that into consideration for the next round. Andy, yeah.
I want to follow up on Will's point when you're asking about confidence. In our last study, 58% of New Hampshire adults said it would take more than a year before the economy recovers to pre-COVID levels, and another 31% said it would take another year. So you add those two together, you're at almost 90% of the public thinks that it's going to take a year or more for the economy to recover.
I think what's been really interesting is with Andy and his team doing the consumer confidence, but us looking at specifically the business community and the business's response and their feelings, their sentiment now, their confidence going forward in their own business, as well as the economy as a whole. It is a really unique snapshot in time of how people are feeling and how things have changed. And that's why we strategically planned to do 3 phases of this survey with the Survey Center to make sure that we could really understand how the needs and challenges of businesses have changed and where their concerns are, so that not only we can adapt our programs and services and our one-on-one advising to meet current needs, but also so that the partners around the state that are on this call, whether it's a BEA, whether it's a chamber, whether it's a regional economic development corporation, whoever you are out there, you too will be better prepared to respond to your clients, your members, and understanding their needs. And similar to the first round of the survey, we'll be looking at creating customized, smaller reports by industry. One for lodging and restaurant, hospitality, one for retail. The Seacoast region had one prepared last time around. The arts community also had a separate report. So there's a really another more unique way to capture the data from just your industry or just your region of the state to dig in even deeper into the specific needs and challenges. I think looking at the Seacoast report from last time around compared to the state, I remember the Seacoast chamber members and economic development professionals were surprised at what was unique about the Seacoast. So we'll be digging into those reports in about another month, and we'll have some of those available to share more broadly with everyone.
Yeah, Liz, one of the big changes that I think everybody's going to see is workforce, and those that want to continue to work remotely and don't want to come back. The Fortune magazine has a great article out right now on that subject, and I'm going to do a segment on it at some point. But I think, HR directors are going to have to really change the way they manage workforce when those who want to continue to work remotely do so. And it will be a bigger chunk of every employee base, probably.
Yeah, again, the data tells a very unique story. And I was glad that we added in this round of the survey the additional challenges that may have prevented a business from being able to operate full time, like individuals not unwilling to come back to work, or having to take care of a family member, or having to deal with the pressures of homeschooling and juggling all of that in, throughout their day, because that again that speaks volumes to the number of businesses here in the state that are factoring that into their business decisions, but it also mirrors what we're seeing nationally with the business community. Any other comments? I've really enjoyed these questions that are popping up, and I'm not sure if I missed any on the chat side. Heidi or Jason, I don't know if you can jump in and tell me if I missed any.
I don't see any, no.
Okay, good. One thing that I do, Heidi reminded me to mention, is that on our website, there is a separate landing page for the resiliency survey. So when you go onto the main page, the main nhsbdc.org website, go under the programs and services tab on the homepage and scroll down to resiliency survey. And then you'll have access to the 35-page abridged version of the report. But if you're interested in the 270-page report, send us an email and we will get that out to you. But you might find what you need in the 35-page version.
I have to get it up on the menu first. I didn't do that part. I will.
Okay. Very soon, there will be a link to the report. But we'll also be sending out a copy of this recording from today's presentation to all of you, and you'll see more news, all that information coming out in our newsletter. So hopefully all of you are signed up for our newsletter. If not, quickly go to the website and drop your email in, and we'll make sure that you get it.
If I was a member of the legislature, I would be glad to get this report.
Thank you, Fred. You know what? You just reminded me of another thing that I wanted to say. Thank you to all of you that weighed in support of SBDC with the legislature. The outpouring of support from across the state, from our clients, from our partners, has been really, really tremendous. And I know you probably heard me say that once or twice or a dozen times, but it really is, it's really heartwarming. I think it gave our team a lot of hope, because as you can imagine, it was really discouraging to see some of the news around the budget cuts. But the letters that are coming in from our clients, I'm looking at Rita, she had tears reading one of her recent client emails, and the quotes that are coming in are very touching. And we are thankful that we get to have this amazing job and this amazing opportunity to support small businesses. But then when you hear from them on how our day job is really helping them, helping their business stay alive, it's their livelihood, it's their employees' livelihood, it's their family, that we're also having a really big impact on. It means a lot to us. So thank you, thank you, thank you. You'll hear me say it probably another 100 times between now and when the budget is finalized, but I think we're making good progress. You saw the governor supports having money put back into the budget. House Finance is working on it now, and we'll continue to talk to House and Senate budget writers to hopefully get us fully funded by the end of the budget, by the time the budget is finalized. So stay tuned.
Report.
We've got 30 seconds until 4 o'clock. So I think we've we've come to the end, but thank you, and let us know if you have any questions, and looking forward to continuing to work with all of you.
Great job, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Melissa.
Well
you.
done.
Thanks.